Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan are racing to secure rare minerals vital to everything from smartphones to advanced weapons. But what's really at stake in the fight for control? China's clampdown on rare earth exports isn't just an economic threat. A new report warning it could cripple U.S. military readiness. With tariffs and the AUKUS pact in doubt, Australia's Prime Minister is facing rising criticism as his meeting with Trump remains unscheduled. More updates from the Quad Summit in Washington, D.C. More details on a successful DEA sting, bringing 2 Chinese drug dealers linked to fentanyl to U.S. courts. How authorities are working to lure them out of China.
Money. So it always comes down to greed.
And 2 Chinese nationals arrested for allegedly spying on the U.S. soil and recruiting insiders. Find out what they're after. The U.S., Australia, India, and Japan are stepping up efforts to obtain more access to critical minerals. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley explains how this counters the Chinese regime's growing influence.
Foreign ministers of the Quad Alliance, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, are strengthening their efforts to secure access to critical minerals and not be so reliant on China. Critical minerals are used to make everyday electronics, medical devices, and military weapons systems, just to name a few. The U.S. gets 80% of its critical minerals overseas, and dominating the market is China, which supplies 90% of the world's critical minerals. So the Quad Alliance formed the Critical Minerals Initiative, as relying on an adversary for such an essential resource makes these nations vulnerable. The alliance wrote in a joint statement, quote, "Reliance on any one country for processing and refining critical minerals exposes our industries to economic coercion, price manipulation, and supply chain disruptions, which further harms our economic and national security."
As China continues to tighten its grip on rare earth exports, a new report from the data and analytics firm Govini is raising fresh concerns about U.S. military readiness. We spoke with energy policy analyst David Blackman, who says the risks go well beyond just economics.
This is a huge national security risk because these magnets are used in every weapon system, every modern weapon system we use now, and they're also a big component in submarines, jets, you name it, they're in it, and so we have to have it. And so for the United States to be almost entirely dependent on what I think everyone understands is our major adversary in China, on the world stage today, that's a very severe national security risk. We do have stockpiles of these metals built up. That's a good thing, but there's a lifespan for that, right? And so in the longer term, if we have a major long-term disruption in those supplies, then we become very vulnerable. So it's an urgent issue that has to be resolved, and I know the Trump administration is working on that.
According to the Govini report on Wednesday, Chinese companies are the main contractors in about 9% of key U.S. defense programs. This includes areas like aviation, maritime, nuclear, missile defense, and space. The report also highlights how much U.S. weapons rely on rare earth minerals, many of which are controlled by China. More than 80,000 U.S. weapon parts use minerals like antimony, gallium, germanium, tungsten, and tellurium. China controls most of the global supply of these minerals, affecting nearly 80% of U.S. weapon systems. Defense expert Murphy Doherty warning it's not easy to cut ties with Chinese suppliers. The report notes Washington is working to build domestic supply options and make supply chains stronger. The U.S. is working on trade deals with Japan and India, but with President Trump's July 9th deadline approaching, a deal with Japan is looking less likely. On the other hand, talks with India seem to be moving more smoothly. Japan, India, and Australia are the other members of the Quad alongside the U.S. Let's zoom in.
Liberation Day.
As the tariff deadline draws near, President Trump spoke to reporters about potential deals with several countries. Trump said once again Tuesday he isn't planning on extending the July 9th deadline, and he expressed doubt that an agreement with Japan could be reached by then.
We dealt with Japan. I'm not sure if we're going to make a deal. I doubt it with Japan. They're very tough.
Trump suggested he could impose a tariff of 30 or 35% on Japan, well above the 24% he announced in April and then later paused. But he said a deal with India could happen.
I think we're going to have a deal with India, possibly. And that's going to be a different kind of a deal. It's going to be a deal where we're able to go in and compete. Right now, India doesn't accept anybody in. I think India is going to do that. And if they do that, we're going to have a deal for much less tariffs.
Speaking to Fox News Tuesday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said a deal was very close.
At the Quad Summit in Washington, D.C., Secretary of State Marco Rubio met one-on-one with foreign ministers from Australia, India, and Japan to boost cooperation. But for Australia, the summit and side meetings have stirred tensions back home. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese remains the last major U.S. ally yet to meet President Donald Trump face-to-face. Let's take a closer look.
After meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the Quad Summit in Washington, D.C., Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong returned home, quote, empty-handed. That's according to Australian Shadow Defence Minister Angus Taylor. The meeting came amid growing uncertainty over a face-to-face between President Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, a meeting that still doesn't have a set date.
What I would say is our strategic partnership is deep. It is trusting. It is to the benefit of both nations, and I think that is understood here in Washington.
Albanese has yet to meet Trump since his re-election last November. The two were supposed to meet at last month's G7 summit in Canada, but Trump left early. Wong said Rubio expressed regret over the missed opportunity, but that hasn't stopped criticism back home. Albanese is now facing pressure over the delay, even after saying the meeting would happen in the coming month.
But I can't comprehend how the president, given how close allies we have been with the US for so long, couldn't give a rat's about meeting with you. I think it's so disrespectful. And why don't you just tell him to bugger off?
Sorry, I've lost the audio there.
Have you? Carl was just asking if you, why don't you tell the president to bugger off? He seems to be snubbing you, given our close ties.
No, not at all. And we've had really constructive discussions. They've been respectful. I've been respectful of the president, and I must say that he's been respectful of me as well.
Previously, the Australian government offered U.S. preferential access to Australia's critical minerals. That's hoping to gain exemption from Washington's 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. But that offer appears to have gone nowhere. Alongside the higher tariffs, the Pentagon is also reviewing the nuclear submarine deal under AUKUS. It's the defense pact between the U.S., UK, and Australia formed during the Biden administration. So far, there's no guarantee that Washington will continue the agreement.
More on the fight against the fentanyl crisis. Former DEA Operations Chief Ray Donovan shared how they lured two Chinese drug dealers to Fiji and extradited them to the U.S. in 2023. Here's a clip from his interview with NBC on Tuesday.
Money. So it always comes down to greed.
Videos obtained by NBC show two Chinese nationals, Qingzhou Wang and Yi Chen, communicating with a mysterious client via video calls. The client claimed he wanted to buy fentanyl precursor chemicals, enough to produce over 100 pounds of pills. The deal led Wang and Chen to fly from China to Fiji, where U.S. federal agents arrested them and later extradited them to New York. In February, they were convicted of fentanyl trafficking, importing precursor chemicals, and money laundering. They will be sentenced in August and could face decades in prison. Wang and Chen both worked for a chemical supplier based in southern China. The company has shipped over 440 pounds of fentanyl precursors to the U.S., enough to kill 25 million people. The DEA says the Chinese firm was linked to the notorious Sinaloa cartel. This Mexican cartel is one of the world's largest drug trafficking groups. It's largely responsible for manufacturing and trafficking fentanyl into the U.S. Derek Maltz, acting administrator of the DEA, recently spoke with NTD about ongoing efforts to combat the fentanyl crisis.
The Chinese criminals networks were working very closely with the Mexican cartels, and this substance, illicit fentanyl, was being found in all the autopsy results. The cartels are just trying to make as much money as they can, and this is going to continue. But we're on the right path. There's a lot of positive things I'm seeing. The fentanyl seizures are down. The drug seizures are down. The law enforcement efforts are coming together. People are recognizing that we have to educate every single kid in America.
Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death among Americans aged 18 to 49. Between February 2022 and January 2023 alone, it killed over 105,000 people across the country. The Trump administration has been pressuring China to stop fueling U.S. fentanyl crisis during trade talks, but so far there's been little progress. Two Chinese nationals face hefty charges for allegedly spying on the U.S. Navy and recruiting military personnel for China. FBI Director Kash Patel calls this one example of the Chinese Communist Party's effort to infiltrate our institutions. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
The FBI arrests two Chinese nationals for allegedly acting as agents for the CCP and spying on U.S. Navy bases and service members, as well as recruiting military personnel to accomplish tasks for China's foreign intelligence agency, the Ministry of State Security, or MSS. FBI Director Kash Patel told Fox News Digital the individuals charged were acting on behalf of a hostile foreign intelligence service, part of the Chinese Communist Party's broader effort to infiltrate and undermine our institutions. Thanks to the outstanding coordination with our partners, including NCIS, we disrupted those efforts and sent a clear message: the U.S. will not tolerate espionage on American soil. Yonce Chen and Lien Lai were arrested on Friday. They could face up to 10 years in prison and a fine up to $250,000. In June, the FBI reported that in 2020, China allegedly conspired to carry out a fake election ballot scheme by mass-producing fake driver's licenses. Kash Patel says that he gave newly declassified documents on this to Senator Chuck Grassley for review. Patel also alleges that the FBI covered up this evidence under previous agency leadership. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
The Pacific island nation of Fiji is pushing back against the Chinese regime's plan to set up a military base in the region. Fiji's prime minister made his stance clear during a visit to Australia. Let's zoom in.
I do not believe that China would even need a base in the Pacific. They have proven that they do not need a base outside China to be able to launch what they have into any other area of the world. If they want to come, who would welcome them? Not Fiji.
Prime Minister Rabuka also said Beijing understood he would lobby other Pacific leaders against such a base. Islands in the Pacific are a focus of rivalry between Washington and Beijing over Beijing's efforts to expand its influence and power in the region. Beijing right now has a security pact with the Solomon Islands and a police presence in several nations. Rabuka said one reason Beijing did not need a new base is due to its intercontinental ballistic missile launch in September. Its missile flew over the Fiji and landed in international waters. In response to the Chinese Coast Guard's planned South Pacific patrols, Rabuka said the Chinese regime would need to observe Fiji's sovereignty and its sovereign waters.
Coming up, tariffs on Chinese imports are pushing up prices on China-made goods, and American consumers are starting to feel it, especially on platforms like Amazon. As the Dalai Lama marking his 90th birthday, focus is shifting to the question of who will succeed him. A closer look at what the future holds for Tibetan spiritual leadership. And Chinese telecom giant Huawei is heading to trial in the U.S., and the charges are serious. The company is closely tied to the Chinese Communist regime. That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Tariffs on China are starting to show their impact. Prices for China-made products sold on Amazon in the U.S. are rising faster than inflation. That's according to a new study by analytics firm DataWeave. Here are the details.
It shows that the median price for a basket of such goods rose 2.6% between January and mid-June. Over roughly the same period, the core consumer prices index rose at an annualized rate of about 2%. DataWeave focused on 1,407 items sold on Amazon, where China is clearly listed as the country of origin. Products rising in price at the fastest pace included school and office supplies, electronic items like printers, and home goods like furnishings and cookware. The increase naturally varied from product to product, with some even seeing decreases. While other factors could be at play, DataWeave says the timing of the increase suggests a ripple effect from new US tariffs on Chinese goods. Its analysis comes after numerous US retailers warned off price hikes as a result of the trade war. That includes Walmart and department store chain Macy's, as well as sportswear giant Nike. However, Amazon said it had not detected any big increases in average prices over the period of the study. Boss Andy Jassy said in May that the firm was maniacally focused on avoiding increases. Earlier in the year, the US hit Chinese goods with tariffs of 145%, though the new levies have since been rolled back to 30%. Donald Trump has defended the move as necessary to rebalance global trade.
Tibetans are gearing up to celebrate the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday. As this milestone age, the question of who will succeed him is growing more urgent. The Dalai Lama is Tibet's spiritual leader and one of the world's most influential figures. In the 1950s, the Dalai Lama fled Tibet to India after China took control of the region. He has long advocated for non-violence and religious freedom for Tibetans. Early this year, Beijing claimed the Dalai Lama has no right to represent Tibet and insisted it would appoint the next successor. But the Dalai Lama strongly opposes any involvement by the Chinese regime, urging his followers to reject Beijing's choice. He says the successor will be born in the free world, describing that as outside China. Both the U.S. and India are watching the situation closely. Washington has made it clear it won't allow China to choose the next Dalai Lama and remains committed to supporting Tibetan human rights. Chinese telecom giant Huawei will stand trial in the U.S. on multiple charges. This after a federal judge recently rejected its attempt to dismiss the long-running case. Huawei, closely linked to the Chinese Communist regime, is facing serious charges, including racketeering, stealing trade secrets from 6 U.S. companies, and bank fraud. The company is accused of using a Hong Kong front company to do business in Iran, violating U.S. sanctions. It's also charged with misleading banks to facilitate over $100 million in illegal money transfers. Huawei has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. The trial is scheduled to begin next May. Who's dumping steel now? The U.S. and the European Union have long accused China of flooding global markets with cheap steel. But now Beijing is flipping the script, saying they're the ones being dumped on and hitting back with new duties on some imported steel products. This comes after complaints over Beijing's unfair trade practices. The new duties range from around 20% to over 100%, and they'll stay in place for 5 years. Targets include the European Union, the UK, South Korea, and Indonesia. China's Commerce Ministry says those countries have been dumping stainless steel into China and claims that without these protective measures, China's domestic industry would be seriously hurt. But the move comes as China's trading partners make similar complaints, accusing Beijing of flooding their markets with cheap steel and undercutting local producers. China is by far the world's largest steel maker. Its steel dominance has driven prices down and squeezed out foreign competition. Both the Trump and Biden administrations have slapped tariffs on Chinese steel, aiming to protect U.S. producers. Renewed concerns over plans for a proposed Chinese mega embassy in London. The site is just a short walk from the city's financial district. It also sits directly above critical communications cables, raising alarms about potential threats to security interests in the UK, Europe, and even the US. Despite the risks, the British government may soon give it the green light. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more.
China is seeking to move its London embassy to a new location, which would make it 10 times its current size and almost twice the size of the Chinese embassy in Washington. It's been dubbed a mega embassy, but the plan has been fraught with growing opposition for months. The final decision over the embassy rests with Housing Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner. Outside the Housing Ministry on Tuesday,
mega embassy, go away! Not in London, not today!
A gathering of dissident groups, parliamentarians and local residents renewed calls to reject the plans. British politician Ian Duncan Smith said China is
the largest threat that we face right now that destabilises the world order. And now the government wants to give them a mega embassy on top of all the communication lines and the secure communication lines that run from the city elsewhere and to the security services.
The proposed embassy would be a walk away from the City of London financial hub and a short journey from the Houses of Parliament. British intelligence and some British politicians have repeatedly raised security and espionage concerns. The plans were rejected by the local Tower Hamlets Council in 2022, but the Chinese government resubmitted the application shortly after Prime Minister Keir Starmer's election victory last year, hoping to get the plans through.
How can it be right to overrule subsidiarity, to say that local decisions, local residents, local people and their objections should be set to one side? What deal was made between the UK and Xi Jinping?
Last week, Foreign Secretary David Lammy told MPs there are no grubby deals with China on any issue, including the proposed mega embassy. Xi Jinping has personally raised the plans in a call with Starmer. But the White House in June warned the British government against building the embassy near London's financial centres. Representative John Moulinar and Congressman Raja Krishnamurti also raised the intelligence threat. They said in a statement that the proximity to sensitive communication cables and finance centres poses a threat to the Five Eyes intelligence alliance and Europe as a whole, and called on the UK to safeguard the security interests they share as close allies. Former CIA chief Leon Panetta has said similar last week in an interview, saying the UK must take whatever steps necessary to make sure that China does not use the location of a new embassy to access British intelligence or US intelligence either. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.